Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cubicle Lift episode number 11. Wow, we've already done 10 other episodes. We're on to 11. This is exciting. We had two awesome guests today, as well as my riveting co-host, Efrem Epstein. This is an honest conversation on workplace mental health. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation today. I've gotten to know one of our guests a little bit through her writing and some of what she's been up to as of late. I don't want to spill the beans. And then the other guest that we have is someone who I've known for a few years, kind of from afar, but who's been on my end part of the Impossible Project book series, and whose work I've followed for some time, and who's doing really, really good stuff out of Florida. So that is like really awesome. My name is Josh Rivedal. I am a co-host on this lovely talk that we're going to have. And I also am a part of the founder of the Impossible Project. And our goal is to have better conversations around mental health and suicide prevention. We do that through books, through plays, through talks, through comedy, through cooking. You know my stuff. I'm going to kick it over to Efrem Epstein this way. Here we go. Talk to us, Ef.
Hey, Josh, how are you? We're actually taking this on my birthday, actually in my birthday hour. And honestly, this is the best way that I could celebrate a birthday, just doing this. Yeah, every episode is special. Gosh, Jeanine, last time I saw you was, I believe, 4 years ago, the 2017 AFSP Overnight Walk, about this time of year. And I remember during that time, we talked about, among things we talked about was our shared love of pentatonics. So I'm actually wearing my pentatonic shirt today. So great to see you again. So great to basically have you be a part of this conversation. Jen, you and I have exchanged a few notes in recent weeks. I came to know you because I read a piece that you did in CMS Wire about mental health and workplace, about some great, fantastic things that you were doing with your company Range, which I'm hoping you'll tell us a little bit more about. And, I remember when I first got involved in mental health advocacy, a lot of people weren't talking about mental health, or definitely not mental health and workplace. And then in recent years, people started talking about it a little bit more. And, when I read, I think I usually have a pretty good sense, is somebody writing about this because they're saying, well, it's a great thing to write about now, so I want to be a part of the trend, or am I writing because I really care? And one of the reasons I reached out to you is I saw you were one of the pieces. I said, this is somebody who really cares. And I find that really precious. And that was one of the reasons I really asked you to be a part of the show. And I'm so glad that you took time out of you, because I know how busy your schedule is. You took time to be here with us. It was so wonderful to have you here. And people from our past shows might know that Colorado is a state that we've noticed per capita. We have so many great things coming out of, and you're repping Colorado today as well. I think we maybe have more people from Colorado than any other state, with the exception of New York, on the shows there. So something in the water, as we said, I think on a previous episode. Yeah. So Jeanine, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Yeah.
Introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, so I'm glad to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I've been doing this advocacy work for several years now. I started off as a mental health advocate, and I started a nonprofit here in Florida, where I'm from, the Sunshine State, called Where is the Sunshine? And you can get all the connections to it, through the Sunshine State. And also, what it's like to struggle and not find that sunshine. But also, I kind of based the name of it on all those songs like we talked about, because F and I both really love music. All those songs that always are so like, that toxic positivity, like the sun will come out tomorrow. And when you're struggling, like, it's still tomorrow and nothing is happening, kind of where I got that name from, but also play on the state of Florida. And so I've been doing that advocacy work for several years. A lot of the work has shifted from just general advocacy to really focusing on suicide prevention, focusing on the issues within the system and how, it's really, for at least as here, it's really a broken system in a lot of ways. it can be oppressive. It can, people have a hard time accessing services. People, there's a lot of barriers in place. So I kind of focus on that, but from a peer lens, because we are lived experience advocates. And I became a therapist. And so I do that work professionally as a clinician, and I actually work inpatient psych. Which again, if you've actually been inpatient psych, specifically involuntarily, you know what the system is like. And I actually do that, which people find is a little bit, I don't know, it's like contradictory to the advocacy work, but I don't see it that way. I see it's okay. I've been through this system, I've experienced it, and now I can be in it, working with people through it with a lived experience lens, both as a peer and a professional, and someone who understands and gets it and can kind of give them treatment and the support that they need from their perspective versus, here's what's best for you. It's like, I understand, I've been there. Let's figure this out together.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeanine. And thank you for being on the show. It's a treat to finally get a chance, because I don't think we've ever spoken.
No, just in writing.
Yeah, so like this is cool. This is nice, and just to hear your words, like not just the writing, because I've read your writing, I know your work, but to see it, to experience it firsthand is really a treat. So thank you.
Yeah,
just add on to, you talk about music. I remember that weekend, which had the AFSP Open Night Walk 2017. It started off, I caught the last day of Mental Health America, which also coincidentally was in DC. I went to your session that you did with Joe Pinola on mental health and music. And I remember we talked about some songs I knew, some songs I didn't know. And it was just one of the most phenomenal sessions I'd ever been part of mental health advocacy. And it was just such a wonderful time.
Yeah, that's kind of my passion. I was a music teacher. I worked in the music industry for many years prior to this whole mental health advocacy stuff. I worked in New York. I was a performer. I was a singer. I actually have a degree in music too. And so, I just like to incorporate those things. I don't get to do it as often as I like now, because that is my coping skill. Like I have to keep at least that separately so I can still function. But yeah, I love doing that. And I love working with Joe, and he's great too with the UROC Foundation.
Hey, let's kick it over to Jennifer Dennard. I hope I said that right. But yeah, thanks for joining us today. Just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you got going on.
Absolutely. Thanks all. Really excited to chat with you. So I'm Jen. I'm one of the founders of a software company called Range. So we build team communication software where teams share async check-ins that help everyone on the team know what's happening. And one of our big differentiators is that we pull in kind of the human side of work. So instead of treating folks on your team or at your company like task automatons, Range really encourages seeing the humanity, encouraging folks to share their mood each day and how they're feeling, to answer team building questions, to build psychological safety on the team. And I think workplace mental health is a thing that we care pretty deeply about, and think both on our own team and in terms of how our product impacts others and how it encourages them to operate. I think in general, it can be a hard position, particularly as like a team lead or a manager, where if you or someone on your team is struggling with mental health, it's hard to know kind of what to do besides just kind of going to HR. And sometimes HR isn't as helpful a resource as they might want to be. And so that's something we think a lot about, is how to support the individual teammates and the managers on the team. So it's kind of the lens I bring to mental health in the workplace.
And so much of that has actually come up about how do people support at work in past conversations we've had on Cubicle Life. So it's almost maybe one of the answers is people should be taking a look at Range. And no, I mean that not to be too salesy, but seriously, it seems like you're the answer to a lot of questions, or you're at least you in your mind in coming up with Range have basically basically answered the questions to a lot of people have, especially as we're entering the hybrid workplace, which has all types of nuances that that we haven't seen. I mean, I know that one thing that I've missed, as much as I like working from home, which I like the convenience of it, I miss seeing people, but also you get a sense when you're speaking with somebody how you're doing with them, what they're when you're relying just on messages on Teams or Slack or emails or even phone calls. You're missing a lot of nuance, and it's tough to know, and it's also tough, even with the best intentions, to build relationships. And so it sounds like you get that, and you're trying to be a bridge in that.
Yeah, and if you think, I think to reference what Jeanine was saying earlier, that like the system is broken, and sometimes that then lands on companies to fill in the gap, right? If someone is not getting mental health support, you often see a manager even or the HR team step in as kind of this gap coverage in some ways of like, this person clearly needs help. And I think with Range, I do not consider it a tool for like a critical issue, but rather it's kind of training the habit of being able to talk about how you feel. And it turns out that when you do that on a more regular basis, then when things start to feel like the sunshine has gone away and is not returning, that you start to feel a little bit more comfortable talking about that with your team and actually getting either support from them or pointed towards more significant resources or therapy or things like that to actually help. And that's, yeah, kind of how we think about it, is training this habit of talking about your mental health, which for so long has been kind of a taboo thing to actually speak about on a day-to-day basis, especially at work.
I want to jump into the first, which really ties into that, but I want to pause for a moment before I jump into our first question, and just sort of non sequitur, because we don't have pentatonics here. Just really quick. Happy birthday to you, Efrem, in honor of your the early end of your 6th decade on this planet. It's been a good run thus far, and I'm glad you're here, and glad that you're my co-host on this. So happy birthday!
So much, thank you much.
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday!
It's 52, and my line is that I'm finally playing with a full deck. So,
well, that's a good one.
It's a good one. Let's kick it off, right? So I mean, Jeanine and Jen, I mean just everything you're saying and everything I'm hearing, I'm just I'm right in the pocket with you, and I want to start off with Jen's piece that she wrote for CMS Wire, entitled "Dealing with the Mental Health Pandemic at Work," and I really think that was a really wise idea to call it the mental health pandemic, because we don't have enough context around what mental health means, and we are talking, I think, about it a little bit more in the terms of struggle, and then you're bringing to light with the work that you do that we can also talk about triumphs and vulnerability and the positive side of it. But like what, and then I'd be interested to hear from all of our guests and co-hosts, et cetera. But like, what prompted you to write that piece? Like, what was it about this time period?
Yeah.
What were you hoping for?
I think like what I observed both with myself, with peers who are leaders at companies or managers, was this real tension where they would have a situation where someone on their team was clearly struggling and they weren't able to either talk about it, didn't feel comfortable, or their default method of support was just to take on that person's work. And so then they were themselves burning out and becoming overwhelmed, just like caregivers or other support systems. And that was creating a cycle where one person is struggling because we have a pandemic or just because, and then that was kind of taking the team on a journey that was taking the whole unit to a more difficult and struggling place. And so what it seemed for me underlying a lot of that was this tension between supporting someone and saying like, you're going to be there, and helping them get help or change or holding them accountable, and feeling like those two things are kind of opposite. Like, oh, if someone's struggling, the only thing I can do is be super nice, offer to take their work on, and like just provide a listening ear. And I don't get me wrong, all of those things are things that we should do when someone comes to you and says like you're struggling. But what I think that can lean into then is like this idea of ruinous empathy, where you're not helping that person also see that maybe they need to seek help, or need to take changes, and just leading to that then leader becoming more burned out. And so just seeing that in a lot of the people that I know and work with, and the real tension where you as a leader are trying to help. You're trying to do something that will actually help this person. And after months of trying, it feels like nothing's changed. And so the article for me was like, here are some tips that you can actually take action on to help in those situations. And I'm not a mental health expert, so I specifically sought out a psychologist and therapist to read and make sure I wasn't recommending anything that was going to potentially go awry, right? Like there's some advice that you can say sounds good, and then when you actually do it, it's probably a bad idea. And so, yeah, that's kind of where that originated. But I'd be very curious to hear from other folks about like how you see that manifesting at work when someone is struggling, and what kind of that looks like from more the person experiencing it. Because I think my article is more for a leader trying to help support.
Yeah, I mean, my work in this field actually started because of my workplace. And really? So that was the origin of all my issues. And so I didn't find it supportive, or if it was supportive, it was artificially, like it's sweetened, like it was not genuine, it wasn't real. It was like, it wasn't what I needed. But also, you know, some places they just don't have that response. It's, you know, work. And if you can't do the job, someone else will. Like, and that's kind of how it is. And, you know, I often have told people I would not share my experiences with my colleagues, because I do see that there could be issues with them. Well, there could be, you know, they could be jealous. Well, I'm not going to pick up that person's work. It's not my fault. I'm doing my job. Kind of those kinds of conflicts. And also, you know, I mean, and, you know, here in Florida, they can fire you for basically anything, even though there are
technical protections, but yeah.
The ADA and all of that, you know, it's a fire at will state, basically. And so I tell people, unless you really need accommodations in your workplace, you know, try and work around it. And look, I will say that larger companies, larger corporations are very supportive. My husband has worked for 2 major banks, and I will say his previous bank, they will do anything for you. His current bank too. Like I got to speak to them a few weeks ago on mental health in the workplace, right? So I think because they have systems in place, right? And, you know, I will say that HR is the equivalent of the guidance counselor at school in some capacities, where people think that they HR and they're going to get that support at the same way the kids go to the guidance counselor to get that support. And the reality is those people are not trained to provide that support. They do have the resources and they can gather them and give them to you, but that's not their expertise. So you know, I think it kind of depends where you work. And what it is you do. I will say that I spoke somewhere a few months ago, and at the end, you know, people never ask questions in front of others, and then they all get in the line waiting for me as I walk out the door. And the last person was a kid who had, I mean, not a kid, like to me, you know, I'm in my mid-40s, so to me, anyone who's younger as a kid, but it was a college student, and they had lost their parent to suicide. And I asked, you know, what resources were in place and what they did. And they said they did everything they were supposed to. They went to their HR, they had their EAP, they used that resource, but the EAP only allowed 6 visits. And after that resource ran out, they couldn't afford outside services. And as soon as that ran out, then they took their own lives. And so, you know, there are things in place, but they are only, you know, they're limited in certain ways. And so that was something I had never talked about or thought about even, the limitations. I always say to people, if you have an EAP, use it, take advantage of it. And I never realized that the limitations on certain EAPs could end up with that outcome. So there's always a lot to think about with this subject.
And for folks who may not, I don't know how aware the audience is of what an EAP is. It's usually through your healthcare coverage, or some healthcare coverages, they have like 6 sessions with a therapist that are included when there's an urgent thing. And that's, something that I think a lot of folks just aren't aware that exists on their coverage, and that they have access to potentially. But it's interesting, this like the assumption of psychological safety or safety in your workplace is not something that you can assume. So the idea that like just sharing that you're going through something actually puts like a target on you, or potentially makes, and if you're getting your healthcare coverage or just salary through work, then obviously that's like potentially adds to the burden. It's a really good point of like, only share that information if you have a good reason to believe that you will be supported in that, versus making it worse.
It's interesting. First thing I want to say is, Jen, kudos. And I'm saying kudos here because not a lot of people do it. Not everybody does this. For when you said you wrote the piece and you said you're not a mental health professional, but you had a psychologist, and I think you said a psychiatrist and a psychologist look it over. One of the things, as I mentioned, as more and more people have been talking about this, used to be awareness was my biggest issue. Lack of awareness was the biggest issue. That still is. We still have not reached complete awareness yet. But one thing that's become an increasing concern, in some cases a bigger concern, is that we now feel people empowered, which is good, to speak on the issue, but don't feel that they need to go and check with what the best practices are. And I've seen that in programming. I've seen that in pieces and writing. And so really thank you for doing that, because that's one of the things which I think separates the pieces I write that I really speak to me and that really I feel good about, as opposed to some of the other pieces I feel less good about. And that's one reason I felt very good about your piece, is that you use some very responsible wording there. And as I said, you cared. Something which I think both of you have alluded to is that are you going to feel safe in this workplace today? I'm going to ask a question. It's going to sound like I'm being very abstract, but what is the workplace today? And let me explain what I mean by that. When I started working, because we've established that I'm much older than everybody else, and I started working at a time where there may have been an internet, but not everybody was using it. I started working in the early 90s. And not only did that mean that you did not have people that really could work from home, but it also meant that when you were in the workplace, for better or for worse, you were in a bubble of sorts for the day, which sometimes was a very long day. And so for better or for worse, I do mean this, for better or for worse, you were in almost a closed community of people for 40, 50 hours a week. And when I say closed community, yes, you could use the telephone, not necessarily a cell phone. Most people did not have cell phones at the time I started working. In fact, virtually nobody did. You didn't, not only could you not basically get on the internet, it meant that you weren't emailing people, which meant that you had to really make an effort, and you weren't doing it that often, to speak to people outside the people in your workplace for the workday. Yes, could you make a quick call outside? Sure. Could you plan to meet somebody for lunch? Sure. But in a way that's totally different now. That was your closed community, and such that if it was bad, it was really bad. But if it was good, it was really good. Totally different on so many levels today. Even if you're in the office, it's not a closed community. You're basically, you have how many people on the outside world that you're following or following you via the internet or via email. I mean, even if you're not on social media during the day, you're not in a closed community. So it's a little bit less clear. We really do not have a roadmap in terms of where does the workplace becoming a family, for better or for worse, begin or end. Back then, for better or for worse, the workplace was like a family. I mean that really on both sides. When it was good, it was really good. But when it was bad, it was really bad. When it was good, it was really good. Now, basically, coworkers maybe are more akin to the person that that deposits your checks at the bank, or the person that takes your order at restaurant, or the person that you service in other cases like that. Yes, you have a relationship with them. Hopefully it's a good relationship, but it's a little bit less, I think it's a lot different than the person you worked the desk over from for 50 hours a week in 1992.
Yeah, as probably the second oldest person here, I came from that working environment, right? And it was really like a real family. I mean, yeah, we fought like siblings, but when it came down to it, I mean, my mentor in the music industry ended up having both cancer and a stroke at separate times. And when push came to shove, I mean, the family rallied together, and there was camaraderie, and there was events and programs and things that we did together. And so it was like real relationship. When something was wrong and someone was hurting, everyone rallied together. And I kind of don't see that now, especially because we come from, I think, a generation of longevity in the workplace where people stayed many, many, many years. It was, a sign of commitment to your work. But now people will go places. I see resumes and it is just like 6 months, 5 months. And so there is no real relationship building, I think, in a lot of places. People also tend to be, it's a little bit more competitive too. More people go to college, at least in the office environment, and that's my perspective, because I've always worked in offices. I did work in retail too, but that kind of an environment, it's so competitive and everyone wants to have a leg up on the other person. So I do see that lack of support and camaraderie. And now I think in the workplace, I don't know, what is it, like 15 months ago, people panicked when they all had to go work from home, and it was like a completely different environment that people weren't prepared for. And what's I find so interesting about that is because all of the people who had, been in the disability world, for example, who had been advocating, let's have homeschool so we can, attend classes. Let's have, kids who have severe anxiety who can't go to school, have a difficult time making attendance, let them have, and it was like, no. Or people who needed to work from home because of childcare, it was like, no. And then all of a sudden in 1 week, it was like, okay, everyone go to school and go to work online. And so we kind of found a way to adjust, and people were not ready for that. And people had a lot of apprehension, but what about meetings? What about going into the office? And suddenly people started doing it. And what we saw was productivity actually increase because there were a lot less distractions for people. People kind of got their flow and their kind of groove and their like system. It took a while for some, but they actually were able to make it work for a lot of people. And now people are kind of, well, do we go back into the office? Do we have a hybrid? Do we work from home? And so again, people are really unsure and having that anxiety all over again and that need to adjust. But yeah, honestly, the workplace is so different. I mean, my current workplace is that bubble in a sense because I am in a hospital. I am, doing 8 to 12 hour shifts. And we can have our cell phones with us on the floor because of HIPAA violations and such. So unless someone needs me and gets me like on my watch, I have no idea what's happening during the day. I mean, I really am kind of, tuned out to the rest of the world, which is kind of how it used to be. And I kind of like it. Because I feel like, oh, let me go look and see what happened out there. I kind of like that an environment for as fast-paced as being in a psych hospital is. I'm surrounded by therapists. I have, 6 to 8 therapists around me at any given time. And so for me, if I'm struggling or I need to process something, the professionals are there. And so I kind of have like an advantage in a way. And so we actually help each other process. But I think that's, a unique situation that most people don't get.
I wish I had a team of therapists around me. That'd be great. It's interesting because I think probably my first job was more of the style that you all are describing of like, I worked obscene hours there. And so it was very much family-like and kind of that was the vibe. And I would say that workplace was relatively toxic. Like I did not think it was in the specific one, not that environment overall. But it's interesting. Like I think a lot of the competitiveness, a lot of the moving between jobs is a reflection of like the job market. Like I left college when the recession was hitting, and like there just weren't very many jobs to be had. And so it was like, okay. And you can see that, I think, also in how companies treat their employees and whether they actually encourage longevity. So like we often see companies who don't really invest in growing their team, and instead they're often hiring new people externally. And so what that says to your current team is like, cool, for me to go up, I have to go somewhere else. Like I have to leave and go to a different company. And so it creates that kind of high turnover or like short term on resumes that you're talking about. I think it's interesting to look at like folks who are doing contract work and kind of working across multiple companies, and that, you know, the recent kind of lawsuits that have happened in California around like, do companies need to provide benefits, and like the law and infrastructure that's in place to support people in kind of how they're actually working today just has not caught up. Like there is not great support for getting benefits if you're working across like multiple companies and things like that. And it's interesting to think about like what's the community that you build if it doesn't feel like a family at work. Like how do you actually build those relationships and such elsewhere? Because to some extent, if you're building 80 hours at work, you're building that family. You're losing out on other relationships at different times. And so if you have like a set bandwidth for relationship building, how do we find those opportunities? And I think especially in the last year, a lot of focus has been on work because we haven't had other engagements and other ways to like engage and find connection with people, except for, you know, TikTok and social media.
I think,
yeah, sorry.
I just quickly, I think there's just a different perspective on it all in terms of, because it seems like, you know, specifically with all this work from home and stuff, and not everybody has that luxury or that burden, depending on how you look at it, or maybe somewhere in between. But we're a bit more siloed, right? I think some of the piece on this is about how are we connecting? How do we connect? Do we connect to our team? Or if you're a solopreneur, like how do you connect? I mean, because you said the bank teller, or the server, or what have you, right? So it's about finding connections, right? And I think that kind of, there's some piece of this. I don't know if this is part of our conversation today. It probably isn't, but just that work and life, I think, is more blended than it ever has been because of technology, because of a lot of things, right? Like that's a whole other conversation. And so I think, you know, there's some stuff on the workplace to help others find connections. And I know of some people who have gone through this and are like, yeah, we have a Friday night, like, or a Friday afternoon, like we play games on Zoom, or we have a drink on Zoom, or we do this thing where we connect, or we had side breakouts. But not everybody has that opportunity or has an environment. So I think there's some of it is on the company, and I think some of it is on the individual when you're in a healthy space or a semi-healthy space to start doing that inventory, like how am I connecting, how am I showing up, where are the places, and if I don't know where those places are, who do I know that might know of the places where I can connect, whether that's like online church or online synagogue or online Cards Against Humanity or online, like whatever, I don't know, like whatever there is, right? Or like, you know, things are opening up too and people are vaccinated. So like, you know, I mean, I've personally, like I found, because I'm more or less a solopreneur with some exception, but like I found volunteer opportunities, and that was my way to connect. And they were small connections. They weren't deep, intimate conversations, but there were ways that I could still find connections, right? And to neighbors and right. So there's always opportunities, I think. And so it's somewhat on the company and it's somewhat on the individual to take stock into our mental health and wellness. And that's an easier conversation. That's not like, am I struggling or am I living with mental illness? Like, it's like, how am I, like, sleep, eat, connection? Like that's not as difficult of an internal conversation to have, or one that's as taboo either. Right. So that's like, that to me is like on the very beginning of the journey, and something to continuously revisit. But how am I connecting? How am I showing up for myself and for others? Right. So I think it's part of it too.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I will say that for most of us now, like there is no work-life balance in a lot of it, especially working from home, because there are really no boundaries. I mean, I get texts all day, even when I'm not working, I get texts and, emails and questions, I mean, for me, I guess my work doesn't ever really end because I work in crisis intervention. So no matter what time of day, so we don't have that regular 9 to 5. Where I really find things concerning are those people who do have those non-office jobs, right? The people who do work hourly shifts in places, like you said, servers, people in the service industry. There's a big service worker shortage right now. I mean, right, and we're seeing that, and people are getting upset. And why are people going back to work? But I think that they're beginning to take, into stock, how this has affected them and how this has affected their mental health. And it's like, okay, I worked in an industry that was not conducive really to a lot of, engagement outside or, mental wellness in terms of hours and stuff, especially if you work in a bar or a restaurant where it's like late nights, you go in, you have to sleep, during the day, or you work as a first responder, those kinds of industries where it's, the hours are all over. And so that is where I see a lot of people struggle. I also work with a lot of people who I see who are patients who work in the service industries, such as like construction, landscaping, and they don't have outlets available to them, or any kind of resource. I mean, they're out there mowing lawns, keeping, and then I see a lot of actual alcoholism with those fields that come in, and roofers, and just that whole industry there is I mean, there's so much. We could talk about this forever. We could do a 30-hour show on just all the issues out there where people need support.
It's interesting, this idea of like investing in connection, because I think with like, I don't know, the like Western values in the United States and what people have invested in, it's this kind of like working hard is always a good idea, that like we're supposed to invest in our companies. And I think when, like servers or things like that was this feeling of family that we were speaking about, like it can also feel like you're investing in those connections. And I think what can be easy to forget is companies are capitalist. Like that is the society that we live in. And so like to some extent, like the max they can offer is a 6-session EAP thing. Like there's only so much that they can do, even if the individuals at that company care. Like I think there's just constraints within that. And at some of those companies, like it's much more heightened on that focus. But I think there's this kind of underlying moral of like, oh, if I put more time into my job, that's definitely a good thing. And I think, yeah, there's potentially like a value shift around encouraging people to invest in these other types of connections versus just getting off work and being like, okay, I need a beer, a glass of wine to like calm down from all of that. And instead thinking about reaching out to someone to like, maybe you can still have the drink, but with someone else there, and like engaging in what that looks like, to build connection outside of work. Yeah, it's just an interesting idea from that.
One of the things that we talked about, I think this might have been even episode 1, is that I think that we need to find ways to make the better argument of the capitalist argument for companies being more supportive. The idea that if companies are more supportive, yeah, obviously do it because it's the right thing to do, but do it also because your profits might go up. And if we do this nationally, if we make this an American initiative, then maybe our GDP will go up. And obviously it's not quite that simple. It needs to be fleshed out a lot more than that. But I think that I think moving the needle in that direction will be beneficial for all of us. And another thing that it was interesting, I think about games before Josh brought it up. One thing that gives me a little bit of hope of where we might be going as a society, one thing I've noticed is that when I was younger, what games used to be popular? The games like Monopoly, the idea that basically crush everybody by building the top hotels, basically like most games are, that win the game. The games that I'm finding are more and more popular are the collaborative games where you work with people, like, actually, I don't think I've ever played it, but the game Pandemic, where you're working with you're working with 5 other people to basically win and solve the issue. And it seems like games like that are becoming more and more popular. And it's funny, I think about a year or two ago, I was playing one of the other games, a game where the purpose is to basically trick other people in there. And a friend basically in a way seriously said, you know what, I don't like this game that much. I want to go, let's finish this game, but then let's go back to playing a game. It wasn't Pandemic, but a game like Pandemic where we're all working together. And, you know, I'm not going to be that simplistic and reductionist, say it's as simple as making the workplace, that successful workplace is as simple as making it like the game Pandemic or like any other collaborative game. But I'm wondering, actually, I think there are lessons we can learn from that to basically make the workplace a little bit, it's going to sound really funny out of context, a little less like Monopoly, a little more like Pandemic. Out of context, I know that phrase sounds bad, but within context, I think you get what I'm going for.
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I used to play like war strategy games with each other, and we were like, we have to stop. This is not helping our relationship. Like you playing the USSR and me playing the USA. Like, I don't think this is great. Like, let's move on to a different type of game.
Couple of things. First of all, I think we're playing an 8 billion person game of Pandemic, and I don't like it, Efrem. Also,
finally.
Yeah, there's because I'm in class and it's at the moment, and I think it's only wise to regurgitate the information that I'm learning there, because that's what you do. But it's just about interdependence. Like there's a long study, and there's a couple of them, but this like robbers cave study that was done where these like boys, like these 2 teams of boys were sort of pitted against each other, and then it got to the point where they became like kind of brutal enemies, and they're like kids at a summer camp, and this has been replicated over time like numerous times, but they found these interdependent activities to get them to sort of build bridges, right? So I see some parallels to that, where like, you know, to make these connections, to have a more inclusive and an easier time in the workplace, having these sort of like, where can we find these moments of interdependence, or where can we like uncover these and then find them and work through them. And so, I mean, that takes some leadership, and that can be you know, that doesn't have to be the team leader, that can be anybody, right? But it should probably come from top down, because we look to our leaders. We usually find them in a hierarchical structure, although that's not where all leaders exist. But just something that came to mind, just finding these interdependent opportunities, as you're saying, like with team building, et cetera. I think that's the only, yeah, there was one other thing that I'm blanking on, but we're sort of getting closer to the end rather than the beginning. And so I want to kind of bring this other piece to the table, something that Jen, you touched on, and this kind of ties into some interdependence, I think, and this kind of ties into connection as well. This piece about empathy and accountability that you touched on in your piece, and then also we've talked about this in other episodes of Cubicle Life, but how can workplaces do this even better? Like sort of this tap dance or high wire act of empathy and accountability, bringing those pieces together for anybody.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you were saying like top down, what kind of resonated for me was like, yeah, we need government help. Like this isn't just a and then like companies that come together and make decisions about this is like the new standard of what we think it should be like to be an employee. And I guess there are pros and cons, but I guess a pro of a slightly declining workforce is that workers have more power. And so you can see that happening in the service industry right now, like what we were speaking about, they're having trouble finding people because what they have historically been able to offer is not compelling anymore. And so you're seeing that shift. And I think in the US, there's a surprisingly bad reputation for things like unions, but there are really powerful ways to combine people together to build these bonds across different individuals that then are compelling enough to the companies or multiple companies to shift how we work. And I think one of the things I think with companies is kind of like the guidance counselor example you used earlier, or like the principal with versus like the classmate or the teacher. Like leadership just gets really removed from what it's like to be someone at their company. And I think that's where my understanding of different research for kind of bringing communities together kind of at a socioeconomic standpoint is to help people understand what it's like to be kind of someone in this other community. And so if you think about leadership as a community and like a teammate as a community, we need more basically like cross-pollination, like bringing in those voices and actually giving them not just a voice, but power as part of the decision making. And unions are one way that people do that. But also like companies can make that choice proactively, like bringing in representatives to their board or to their senior leadership that are really just there to represent the individual, kind of like the ombuds role, but kind of at a more elevated for senior leadership. And that's one of the things I think helps hold people accountable to actually being both empathetic in a real way, but also like providing resources and things at the company level.
Yeah, I agree. We see that structure and we see that top-down approach, and we see it a lot during Mental Health Month, right? We see that a lot of companies are like, yay, awareness, and they're putting that message out there, but they're not really including voices who've actually experienced this. They're not giving them a seat at the table, so to speak. And so when they do these campaigns and they have these great ideas and let's bring in someone to do yoga with everyone, they're not really thinking about, or they're just not knowledgeable in this sense, and they don't understand what it's like to actually, okay, there's a little bit more than that. Yes, that can be helpful for some, but for more people, we need a little bit more, better strategies, better ideas, better resources, and that kind of thing. And so I think that's very important. I think giving some people a seat at the table and incorporating those voices. So when they do want to, expand whatever it is that they're doing, their programs or whatever, to actually take, the staff. And you're right, Jen. Often we see that leadership, they forget what it's like to be an everyday worker bee within the hive, and they kind of forget they're in their offices with their assistants and such, and they forget what it's that where they started or what that experience is like. And so I think that's really important, that inclusion. We need more equity, I would say. And I think that you made a really good point about that. This is a capitalist society, and they're in the Western culture that we focus so much on work and how work is what is your social value. And that's a flaw, whereas we see in other cultures, it's about family, it's about the community structure. That is the important. It's not about the education or the work, because that really shouldn't be what makes a person who they are. At least I don't consider people who they are based on where they work.
Yeah. And if we're going to have the company play such a role in our society, then the company has to take responsibility for things that in other cultures the family does. Things like, the food and, not the food, the like healthcare and providing for those folks. And if, that's kind of like a societal structure question of like, can we wave a magic wand and think through like how we do this, which is, as we've seen during the, what was it, you said, the $8 billion pandemic, those changes are harder to enact than they are to think through. But I wish we had more experts like you, Jeanine, that like companies were actually working with. I'm like, hey, this is what it's actually like.
Yeah, I do too. That's a good thing, that when I do go to speak to companies, I think it kind of gives them a little bit more insight. I did speak at a company not too long ago where it was a large company, and they actually brought in full-time therapists as employees. And they brought in one, and within the first 2 hours, they had the whole week filled with slots. So they had to hire a second one. And that just showed the need just in one office.
Oh, that's powerful.
Yeah. And so they have two full-time therapists. As far as I was aware at that point, they had two full-time therapists just serving their employees, which I had never heard of before, in a non-mental health, non-healthcare type of environment, in a corporate environment. So I was very impressed, but that's because that corporation had been affected deeply by suicide.
Oh, wow.
Like to see like a longitudinal study, like between small cap, mid cap, large cap, and like small businesses, like a few small businesses, several of them over like 10 years to see like, all right, we're intentionally like investing in the mental health and the health of our employees, and we're doing these things, some of what we're talking about, and some of it we just have to be designed really well. And then to see like what's your profitability, since we're, because we're talking about capitalism, what's your profitability versus like you know, companies who didn't, and include the, you know, the studies, the, you know, the I guess randomized control trial groups or whatever like that. We're at about 3 minutes, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and it's my job to play air traffic controller. Efrem, I think you had something to say, and then I kind of want to just make sure that each of our guests has like maybe a quick soundbite to kind of sign us off with, and then we'll close down.
Sure. Well, they can go first. What they have to say is probably more important than what I have to say.
So let's start, Jeanine, like just a final thought, and then Jen, and then F, and then I'll close it down.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts. Like I said, I could go on forever, but I really think that mental health in the workplace really needs to include the voices of those who've actually gone through this and who have experienced this. And I think, like I said, you really have to be aware of your environment, where your supports are, where you might meet resistance, and do what's best for you. You know, my heart is kind of heavy right now because I know a lot of people out there right now that I personally know are struggling in general. And you know, I always hate when people have a hard time. And, you know, I don't like the cliche term, reach out and get help, but you use the supports around you, use social media if you need to, if you're a person who's struggling. There's a lot of support in social media and online on apps and such that you can at least start that foundation until you can get, you know, the appropriate professional support that you may need.
Thank you, Jeanine. Appreciate you very much. Jen.
Yeah, I mean, one, just thanks all for chatting. I've learned a lot just on this call from you all. And I think, yeah, I think kind of a reminder from what we talked about earlier of being cognizant of your relationship to the company, and that it's not, you don't have to work all of the time. And so investing in building these other relationships can help in the future if you are struggling. And then I think from like a leadership perspective, like, it is really a cultural shift to start thinking about mental health as a priority for the company. And really, it does lead to more effective companies and more effective teams. And so if you're thinking about like dollars, it's about retention and keeping people on your team. And tools like Range are there to help with some of that cultural aspects of making mental health more okay to talk about and creating an environment where people feel safe to engage in these discussions.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. Appreciate you. Efrem.
So 11 minutes ago, we hit 1:48 p.m. Eastern time, which means I'm officially 1 year wiser. So let's see if that's right there. What I will say is that we've been talking about, you know, what do you need? How do you bring out the best in people? And Jean gave her example that so many people needed, so that this company invested and put therapists there because the people needed it. And I think about what motivates me. That's a question that you always ask. People have always asked me in interviews, how do you motivate people? What motivates you? How do I motivate you? And really, I think that people overthink that. The way to motivate people is be somebody that people want to do their best work for. I even see it nowadays, now that I'm working virtually and I interact with all people, and certain people on the same day can have me saying, gee, I'm excited to do this project for this person, and I'm less excited to do the project for that person. It really comes down to how they make me feel and how they make me feel as a human being. So how do you motivate people? Stop trying to be like Vince Lombardi. And I'd say better, really, if you watch this episode, be like the three people here, be like the three J's, Jeanine, Jen, and Josh. Those are three people who I think I would bring out my best work in me. So let's say be kind, be caring, and show them you care about them, and show them that you want them to do your best work for them. Be collaborative, and you're going to bring out the best people. They're going to do their best work for you, and your company's going to make more money.
Excellent. Thank you, Efrem. I would just say my final thought really is just invest in your own mental wellness, if, when, and where possible. We're talking about mental wellness, mental hygiene. We're not talking about the struggle. We're not talking about character flaws or weaknesses, which shouldn't be associated anyway. But if that stigma is hard to to get out of your head at the moment. Just invest. You know, we talk about investing in so many different ways. So personally, like, invest in your wellness, right? There's a lot of ways to do that. Even physical wellness can affect one's mental wellness. And then companies invest in the mental wellness and the mental safety and the mental hygiene and the mental health of your employees and the people who are, because it's only going to make things better at your company. And it might be a temporary pause, but it's going to lead to so much good down the road. So consider that your ROI is going to go up for that investment. So we need to continue, and we will. On Cubicle Life, we're going to continue having these conversations in a variety of different ways. A massive thanks to Jeanine and Jen for coming on and doing the work that they do in the variety of ways. Bravo, and thank you for having this conversation. I'm Josh Rivedal for Efrem Epstein and Cubicle Lift, an honest conversation on workplace mental health. Thank you so much for joining us, and can't wait to see you next time. Thank you.